Good afternoon, Coldwell Banker George Realty agents. It's a pleasure to be here with you. Today, we're going to continue on from last week. We did the residential lease listing agreement. We looked over that, and today we're going to be looking over the residential lease agreement and the supporting documentation. So I'm going to get started. As I said earlier, Peter Cam will be here. He'll be a little bit late. I have asked the people in the room to walk up to the speaker here if they have questions, or to say it very loudly so that there's not a disconnect for you that are on Zoom. Okay, so I left this as it populates because we always want, even if this lease is under a year, we still want to do an agency, okay? So make sure that you're just in the habit of doing an agency disclosure on all of your transactions, your documents, okay? So I just left that there to populate it, and we're all pretty familiar. It is going to come with a CCPA, the California Consumer Privacy Act advisory, that will populate with your agency. So make sure that you have both of those on top of your lease, okay? So I'm kind of trying to start in order of, if you are the one preparing, and you have a tenant, the lease listing agent will prepare the the agreement, but the tenant representation, the agent representing the tenant, needs to prepare this. So you're going to prepare the tenant representation. So date prepared. Right to represent the tenant. The broker is Coldwell Banker George Realty. The representation period, you'll see this is a lot shorter than the other one. Beginning and ending, it's or if earlier upon tenant taking possession pursuant to a lease or rental agreement. So if you're running around showing a tenant house, make sure that you do have this in place, okay? So that you can be compensated, because last week we learned that on the listing agreement, it is only commission for the listing agent. It does not cover the tenant's agent. So this is extremely important. Please make sure you have it so that you can get compensated for your effort. So this property type automatically defaults to SFR, or you can exclude it. But anything that you're showing, you can check the boxes for the property type. So it will default to an SFR, but you can also check for an apartment, a condominium, and such here. Location, this one doesn't have counties, so put the cities in where you're showing the rental agreement, the spaces. Additional description, I probably would just leave that blank. Additional tenant preferences, it's good to know if they want a month-to-month or a one-year lease, and things of that nature. So if you found a property that they took and it didn't have, and the bedrooms were a little bit different, this agreement would still be valid, okay? Because this is more about the money, but this is just their additional preferences. If they want to give you some additional preferences, or they need a month-to-month, so you'll need to talk to them about that. Here it's telling us that the broker compensation is not fixed by law, and it's set individually, okay? So the amount of compensation, so for a fixed term, you can click the box and put the % of the total rent due under the lease, or you can put an amount here. For month to month, you probably on a month to month, because if they only go for 2 months, maybe you want a set fee on that, is what I would recommend. So see if you can get a set fee. Because month to month, you may be, out there running around and not get much if it's only a month or two.
90% of the time is 1 year.
Yeah. Like they said in the room, 90% you're going to be with a 1 year person, somebody looking for a 1 year lease. Or you can check the box here that the tenant will not owe any compensation. Okay. Payments received by the broker from the housing provider. If the broker receives compensation from the housing providers or others, the amount due the broker for representing the tenant will be credited against the tenant's obligation. So in other words, if you get the housing provider to pay for it, you need to credit it. This does not mean it's from your listing agreement. The listing agreement, if you're dueling on this, only covers representation of the housing provider. You can also ask for commission to represent a tenant as well, okay? Just to make that clear. So this is a lot shorter. You're going to have the tenant sign and you're going to sign, and that will be the agreement for commission, okay? So again, listing agents for the leases, make sure that you are letting the client know that in most cases, the tenant's rep is going to ask for commission. And if you dual, you'll be asking for some commission too, because it's double the work, right? So
But
make
it's
sure.
only verbal, that part. I mean,
Yes.
You tell your client, okay, the buyer's agent or the tenant's agent is gonna bring somebody and they don't want to work for free.
Right, so she's saying you only have a verbal,
Mhm.
when you're the listing agent talking to the client about this. Yes, but make sure you tell them, because again, we don't want to shock people. So when you are representing a client, make sure that you have the application completed. Have them complete it, okay? So that's the second step. If you take a client out and they like the property, make sure that you are being proactive in getting all of the documents. You will want to ask the lease listing agent what the housing provider will be expecting, but at a minimum, they're certainly going to expect an application to be signed because that's how they run credit. So they can check the box here. If they'd like to receive a copy of the credit report, they check the box here. If they have a subsidiary pursuant to following a government program. So if they're on a government program and will be getting some assistance, they need to check here and put the program here. So they'll sign it and date it. And then here, the property screening fee. This is important so that it authorizes the housing provider, or as I just went through with another agent, they used Rent Spree. So because I've never used it, I can't speak too much of it. But if you click Rent Spree, everything goes through an application. The credit report comes back. They pay directly to Rent Spree. So that is another option that CAR provides. You can click Rent Spree. Okay. So have them fill this out and sign and date. Okay. So, and this notice regarding background investigation reports, this will populate with the application. Okay. So now we're going to get to the meat of what the training session is about, the residential lease or month-to-month agreement.
Excuse me,
Uh-huh.
the notice regarding CRA,
Yes.
what does it stand for?
Consumer Reporting Agency. Consumer Reporting
So
Agency,
that
when
would be
you,
registry.
yeah, when you order the reports or anything like that. So CRA stands for Consumer Reporting Agency. So if you're ordering reports or the housing provider is, put who they're ordering it from, address, telephone, email, okay? All right, so now we're on the lease agreement. The date you're preparing it, the tenant is Minnie Mouse. The property owner will be Mickey Mouse. You're gonna put the address here. Who is gonna occupy the premises? This should have been Minnie Mouse. I made a typo, but Minnie Mouse is occupying it. If Minnie Mouse was occupying it with some minor children, I will normally put and minor child or children. I don't really spell out their names, but I do make note that, you know, they're occupying it. So that's up to the housing provider. But you need to have the persons that are going to be occupying here. Everybody 18 and above should be providing the housing provider an application, because at 18, they're considered adults, okay? So here, any person in the premises other than those listed in paragraph B are not permitted to stay more than, here they have 14 days. I've seen landlords take it down to 7 days or 7 days, 3 times a year. They'll put in an addendum. So you need to address this with the housing provider and see how many days they want in here. As long as you know where these paragraphs are on this agreement, it's easy to work with the housing provider and get it the way they want it. The following personal property maintained pursuant to paragraph 11 is included. We have a refrigerator, washer, dryer, and microwave here, or you can check it. And there'll be an addendum attached. This, I think, if it's small, you know, you don't have that many, just use the line. The addendum maybe could be for more furnishing in the apartment. So if it's has more furniture in there, you would want to note that and make sure, okay, that you have it on an addendum. So here, the term will begin on 10/1/2024. If tenant does not pay the amounts due in this lease agreement, they have no right to possession of keys of the premises. Now, there is a form. If the tenant, I don't recommend you signing with a tenant if they do not have the cashier's check in their hand. So hopefully none of us will have this issue. So please, when you're instructing your tenants that you're going to meet them for the lease signing, also be instructing them of how much to bring with them via the cashier's check, okay? So, however, if something happened and you didn't do that and you didn't get the payment for them, and you need to notice them. So there is called a notice to pay. I'll show it to you. I did not print it, but I'll show it to you. We should not have this problem because we always recommend you have the fees up, you know, when they're signing the lease agreement, okay? In a cashier's check. So month to month, you can either check A or B. Like the room said, it's 90% is going to be, you know, an agreement for a year. So I've checked B. I'm going to put that this term ends 9/30/25, which is a year, and at 8 p.m. Okay. So the tenant agrees to pay $35 per month. Rent is payable in advance on the first day of each calendar month and is delinquent on the next day. But we do need to fill out another box, so keep that in mind for this. Here, the payment, rent payment shall be, this is really up to the property owner because some will not want a money order, for instance. So you check whatever they tell you to check. Maybe they just want a cashier's check. I doubt it, usually the first time in, but that is again up to the housing provider to tell you how they want to receive funds or if they will accept electronic payments. So that you need to discuss with the property owner. Rent shall be delivered to the name of the property owner here, the phone number, the address. So you want to make sure that you have all this filled in so they know where to find the property owner. Okay. And
Where is it?
Okay. Yeah. Anywhere street that I made this up. So if checked, maybe it's an office. They have an office. You can check this box and they can deliver it personally between what hours on the following day. That's if that's applicable. So if there's any payment is returned for NSF, non-sufficient funds, I usually check here and I speak to the housing provider that going forward, cashier's check will be required. So that will be up to the housing provider. And make sure that you're talking to them about that because that would be all future rent shall be paid by cashier's check or money order. I prefer a cashier's check, but that's my preference. And we know it goes the housing provider's preference, not ours. So the security deposit, I sent out the security deposit quick guide from CAR. So here you can see that we're doing equal to 1 month's rent, $3,500 as security deposit. So the maximum amount security deposit paid on or before initial shall be paid on or before the initial occupancy. However, cannot exceed 1 month's rent unless an exception applies. I sent you out the quick guide. There are some exceptions for what they call small landlords. I think it's no more than 2 residential properties, but no more than 4 units, contained within those properties for lease. So, look at that quick guide I sent you for anything like that. So here we want to check that the security deposit is never held by the agent or the brokerage. It's held by the owner. So you always want to make sure you have C checked, that it is transferred and held by the owner. And in fact, when the cashier's checks come in, of course, it's going to be made payable to the housing provider unless you have instructed them to take your commission out and pay the balance due to the housing provider. The commission would be paid to Coldwell Banker George Realty. For instance, if somebody owes you $8,000 coming in, a tenant, but you're going to get your commission up top of $2,000, you direct them to provide a cashier's check, $2,000, Coldwell Banker George Realty. The remaining $6,000 goes to the housing provider, and that is allowable in the lease listing. We saw that last week that you can do that, but make sure you're pointing that out to your housing provider, because sometimes they prefer to give you a check back. Maybe that's the way their accountant wants it, but you need to point that out first. Don't just automatically do it without talking to them about it, okay? So here, the security deposit shall not be used by tenant in lieu of payment of last month's rent. Okay, so the housing provider can use some of the deposit for NSF fees or repair or damage other than ordinary wear and tear. Now, when they do that, the tenant will need to reinstate that security deposit to its full balance within 5 days of the housing provider having to use it, okay?
Well, will you repeat that?
So so she wanted to repeat. So let's say the security deposit, the housing provider needed to dip into it because they needed to make a repair that was caused by the tenant excluding normal wear and tear or by their guest. They made some damage to the unit and the housing provider was going in to repair it. The housing provider or any late fees or NSF fees can also be deducted. The housing provider can use the security deposit, but then they can ask the tenant to reinstate the funds that were taken to make sure they have the full security deposit, okay? So, and the tenant should do that within 5 days of request. And of course, the security deposit is not returned until all tenants have vacated the premises and the keys returned. There is no interest paid on the security deposit. You can see in number F. So this is a really important box here, number 5, move-in costs received due. Move-in funds shall be paid by, there isn't a time in any agreement that I've done that it hasn't been a cashier's check. That again is up to the housing provider. Maybe they're real comfortable with a wire or electronic payment, but make sure that you're talking to them and how they want to receive that initial payment, because it's usually a larger sum. So you're going to stipulate the rent dates here. The first month's rent is here, the $3,500. The due date should be just a little bit before they move in or at lease execution. You always want to collect those fees ahead of time. Security deposit is $3,500 here. So they're going to owe $7,000. The payment received, I will date it when it's received. In addition to that, I will provide them back, even though they probably already have it, a copy of their cashier's check. I'll provide it back to them and with their copy of the lease. So always give them a copy back of whatever they provided if it's not a wire transfer. But any kind of check they provided you, when you're giving them a copy of the executed lease that they executed on one side, always give them that copy. Of course, the housing provider will execute it after them, but give them a copy of what they signed that day, along with a copy of the payment they made, so that everything's nice and tight, okay? So the late charge return check fee, it's built in here. Okay, let me start here. So the housing provider, this defaults to 5 days, is late. I put 3 days, but that again is up to the housing provider to tell you. Also here, for late fee, it's either a set sum or a percent. Talk to the housing provider about it.
5% of 3,500.
Yeah. So that's due as a late charge if they're late. $25 as an NSF fee for the first return check, or $35 for each additional return check. These fees are kind of low. So you can ask your favorite banker how much return check fees are, and make sure that you're covering, okay? And that would be up to the housing provider to tell you that. And the housing provider and tenant are agreeing ahead of time that these are reasonable fees, okay? So parking is pretty important, because maybe there's a garage on the property, but this particular tenant will not have access to it. So you need to be pretty clear on where they're going to park. So check the box in carport only on the property. The right to parking is included in the rent charged. Okay, so there's no additional charge for them to park in that carport. If there was no parking, you know, there are some apartment buildings in large towns where there won't be parking. You know, it's really crowded. So if there's no parking on the premises, please make sure that you're checking B instead of A, okay? Storage, I like this because storage is permitted as follows. You can put, maybe there's a storage shed on the property, I don't know, that's empty, but whatever here. And the right to separate storage is or is not included in the rent. Check what's ever applicable, or if there's an additional fee for storage on the property. Maybe they have little garages they rent out, something like that. But for me, most of the time, I'm checking and talking to the housing provider, except for tenants' personal property contained entirely within the premise. Storage is not permitted on the premise. So B, because you want the property tidy, you know, you don't want things just stored anywhere. So normally, in all the leases that I've been involved with, B is checked, okay? Utilities are really important. So this defaults to that the tenant agrees to pay for all utilities and services. And I know it says and services, but I always put like Wi-Fi, internet. You could put cable TV if desired, so that they know that they need to pick that up themselves if they're going to do that. Wouldn't want them to think it's already set to go. So even though it says and services, I tend to be too much sometimes, but I do add that in there. And you could put cable TV. Yeah, except if there was an exception, you would put that here, which shall be paid for by the housing provider or as agreed in separate addendum. So the except, what could that be? Water, because there are properties, even, yes, the condominiums, sometimes they will have, they won't have separate meters and things like that. So maybe the HOA is paying. Now, a single family home that I just worked on, they have beautiful yard, but they want the tenant to pay the water, but they will pay, because they have all of their figures, the 120 every billing, because that covers the yard. They already know it because they've tested it. It's been vacant and they've watered it every day the way they like. So if that's the case, then make sure you're attaching an addendum to outline that, so that the tenant knows that they will be getting $120 credit on the water bill In this case, the housing provider kept that water bill in their name. They will provide an invoice along with the copy of the water bill for the tenant to pay in excess of 120. Okay, so make sure that you're talking to them about that, especially like you said in the room about water. Okay, if there is a sub-meter on any of this, this one has a form. I have attached it in the back just to show it to you briefly. So make sure that you're looking at these. And when you're going over the lease draft with the housing provider, I think there's a lot of good things in here that you can discuss with them. Hey, is there sub meters or anything like that that I should be aware of? Okay. So now we're going to go to the condition of the premises. So check all that apply. So we all know there's a move-in form, which is extremely important. And it's so important. And if it's something that you can't express in writing on that form, you could put see attached picture, write it the best you can, but also attach a picture. So pictures are wonderful. If you need to document something with a picture, make it part of your move-in form. Okay, so generally I check the A, that the tenant acknowledgement of the condition attached in the car form, the move-in form that we'll do with them. So you want to get out there ahead, of course, of the start date, right, of the lease. But we all know that if there's, you know, maybe a faucet is leaky and nobody knew about it. So you want to give them a little bit time to let the housing provider know if there's something that's not operating properly. It defaults to 3 days. You can put it down to 2, whatever you deem necessary. So give them a little bit of time to move in and get the squeaks out and make sure that everything's okay. All right. Okay, so down here, this is maintenance and reporting. So the tenant shall water the garden, landscaping, trees and shrubs. If there's electric, you know, sprinkler system, especially on a house, you can note that also on your addendum, that the timer is preset for watering and things like that, because sometimes they won't need to be watering because there's preset timers. So these are questions you're going to be asking the housing provider. The housing provider shall maintain garden, landscaping, trees, shrubs. Here, on one of the leases I just saw, monthly gardener shall be provided by housing provider at housing provider's sole expense. So some housing providers want the yard looking nice and they're going to provide that gardener. Okay. So the tenant, if there's a balcony or something like that, you know, you should probably put that they should maintain it, you know, sweep it, whatever. Okay. So these are items to discuss with the owner. If there's periodic pest control, in this case, I left it blank because in this sample there isn't. So I left this blank. The following items, now this is important. Remember up top, we told them that we had personal items we were leaving there for them to use. These are personal property that are included in the premises. If you put these here, this means they are without warranty and the housing provider will not maintain, repair, or replace them. So very important, make sure you're putting that in there if that is the housing provider's desire. So that's something we could miss. So I always recommend you put it in there on H. Okay, and neighborhood condition, the tenant is advised to satisfy themselves as to the neighborhood area and conditions. Animals, unless otherwise provided for. In the civil code or other law, no animal shall be kept on or about the premises without the prior consent of the owner, except as agreed to if you check this box in the attached animal terms and condition addendum. So we all know that pets are different than service animals, emotional support animals. So and when people ask you about those, when they're inquiring on your property, Just give everybody an application. We're not the property owner. Let the property owner make their own determination. Just say, yes, I'll give you an application and send it to them. Or like I do, I put them in the kitchen of the property and make enough copies and let them pick up the applications, okay? So smoking. So this is a non-smoking contract unless you check the box here in C. So no smoking of any substances is allowed on the premises or common areas, okay? So unless you check the box in C, it's no smoking, okay? So a lot of people ask about that, property owner, so you can point them to paragraph 14 and they can take a look at that, okay? Rules and regulations, if it's a single family, they may not have a rules and regulations list. Sometimes they do. But anyway, the tenant already agrees here in A to comply with rules and regulations that are posted at any time on the premises or delivered to the tenant. Okay, so if later the housing provider determines they need some rules and regulations, they can certainly get those over to the tenant. If it's a condominium or planned unit developed, make sure you're checking the box. You're going to need to provide them with the HOA rules.
The whole package?
Ask the housing provider, because I don't think you're going to be providing them with the financials of the HOA, things like that. But sometimes in the HOA, there are rules, especially if there's pools, common areas, there are rules to those common areas. And you should be providing that. Let the housing provider pull those out of their package and provide them.
Because sometimes it costs you like a $500, $200 to pull out the whole thing, the HOA.
Right. She's saying it costs money, but when they bought the property, or presumably they should have a package. If they don't, that's up to the housing provider. They need to talk to their own HOA to get the rules and regulations, because you certainly want to make sure that anybody you provide that home to understands the rules of the community. So talk to the housing provider about that. So alterations and repairs, they need housing providers' consent to make any repairs, alterations, including painting and wallpapering. So keys and locks, this is really important. The tenant acknowledges receipt of, will receive. I always put the start date of the contract. I don't give them to them early. And the reason why is because I want to make sure that they've already provided, and you'll see it later in the bed of the contract, the insurance cert. So I want to make sure that the housing provider has the insurance cert. And I always check that box for them. If they want it, then it's in there. Okay. So this is the commencement date. They've been provided with 2 keys to the premises. Sometimes there'll be a remote control. Sometimes there'll be a mailbox key or common area key. So right here, super important, 18B, please do not miss this. You need to let them know, have the premises been rekeyed or not? So don't miss checking either one. That is for you to ask the owner, okay? Okay, so are there any questions before I continue on? Okay. So I'm not going to go over in detail each paragraph. I want to make sure where there's check boxes that we recommend you check, that we do it. So entry here, you're going to see if you check C, that the tenant authorizes the use of a key safe lockbox to enter the premises. Okay, so don't just place a lockbox there with a key in it. You need permission. Okay, so that's something for us to bear in mind. This photographs and internet advertising, you know, when we put houses on the market, they tend to hit everywhere, even lease listings. So this is outlining that it's not in our control, but the pictures can be on the net. Okay. Signs, the tenant does authorize the owner to place a for sale or for lease sign on the premises. There is no assignment or subletting allowed unless they have the housing provider's blessing on that, okay? So 23, if you have roommates, something to pay attention to, that you're all obligated either on your own or together. So 23 is pretty important, for people to understand, hopefully everybody, cooperates with each other and pays, but you're each individually or jointly responsible for the lease agreement. So possession, if the housing provider was unable to deliver possession of the premises on the commencement date, within 5 calendar days, they can cancel. The tenant may terminate the agreement by giving a written notice. The only reason I can see this happening is maybe somebody didn't move out when they were supposed to. I don't know. Okay. Or you can check that the tenant is already in possession. So when a tenant is vacating the premises, I like C, because if you want to have an inspection with the housing provider before this lease is up, you can request that. And the tenant can be there with the inspection. And why would they do that? Because they want to make sure that what they're being charged for, or maybe they would like an opportunity to fix any damage. Okay. So just bear that in mind, that that a tenant can request that. So temporary relocation, this is if they were doing some termite work. So it's saying that they will get entitled to a credit of rent equal to the per diem of the rent for the period of time that the tenant needs to vacate. So that's right in the agreement. Okay, insurance. I want to go over this. So for C, check the box, talk to the housing provider if they wish that. So you can talk to the insurance agent. An agent just told me either it's 100 or 500. It's a very nominal additional expense for renter's insurance, but make sure you're talking to the housing provider. If they're a bigger landlord, they probably have done this several times and gotten insurance cert. If they're a smaller provider, you may need to point this out to them and ask if they would like that, the tenant to have renter's insurance. I always recommend it, but again, it's up to the property owner. Okay. I know my daughter's apartment up north for college, I have to give them a renter's policy every year. If I don't, they'll call me, but mine's an auto renewal. So it's good to have for everybody. 30 is important. Number 30, because if you have, let's say, a unit that's hardwood floors or, something like that, the tenant can have a water bed. It says right here, they shall not use water beds unless the tenant obtains a valid water bed insurance policy and increases the security deposit. But some housing providers, they don't want a water bed no matter what. So make sure you got your eyeball on that paragraph. You put in the addendum, that's there's no water bed permitted if that's the housing provider's desire. Make sure you have your eyes on this. I always check too, the portable dishwasher, portable washing machine. I have used a portable washing machine. We were testing it out for my daughter at college. It kicked water all over the dorm tile. Thank God it was at the dorm. So that thing went bye-bye. It was a mess. So you can talk to the provider about paragraph 30. I recommend you pay attention to it and click the boxes, talk to them about water beds. Okay. Because sometimes the insurance policy, those things went haywire, it may not even be enough. Okay. So the housing provider, you need to have the notice address here and the tenant's notice address here. Okay, so mediation is built into the contract, as I said. Now pay attention to number 36. The prevailing party between the housing provider.
What is the 33 tenant estoppel certificate? What is that?
So, okay, so a tenant estoppel certificate. Sometimes if a housing provider is refinancing or anything like that, the lender is going to require an estoppel, or if they're selling, the new buyer is going to require an estoppel, and the estoppel, it reconfirms the amount they're paying on the lease. It confirms their security deposit. And it also confirms, hey, who owns the washer dryer if it's in the unit? Who owns the fridge? Who owns the stove? And the tenant signs it. So an estoppel certificate, if it is requested, they have 3 days, to provide it. And that's usually due to a refinance, somebody's selling. So that's why they would want estoppels. So attorney fees here, the housing provider or tenant shall be entitled to reasonable attorney fees and costs not to exceed $1,000. That's pretty low. I usually put in 2,000, but that is something to discuss with your housing provider. I just discussed it with somebody yesterday, and he said, no, just leave it at 1,000. 2,000 isn't going to be enough either. So, he just wanted to leave it alone. Okay. So he doesn't want people to feel uncomfortable. So disclosures, mold and dampness, this will auto-populate. This is required. You must have that. Bed bugs auto-populates. There is a Megan's Law database disclosure. It is here. We don't look up Megan's Law for anybody. They need to do that themselves. Please don't do that. Let them go on the site themselves, the website themselves, because if we didn't see all the information, or maybe we're looking at it different than the client would, don't look it up for them. Let them point them to this website and let them do it themselves. Here, the residential and environmental hazards booklet. This is the one I always check. Click on D. And what that's going to do is populate that 65-page booklet that talks about asbestos, things like that. I like it. I want it part of the lease, and I, leave a copy at the property or email it. Okay. There is a flood hazard disclosure, which will populate. If you have other material facts, state them here or attach an addendum. Okay, so here the RPOD is fairly new. So the RPO will make additional disclosures and provide the RPOD. Okay, lead-based paint will automatically populate. We'll go over all of this. Okay. Time is of the essence, so get it executed. Make sure the agency is in with the right license numbers here, very important. Okay. Now here you can check tenant compensation to broker if you wish. If they sign that and they're going to pay you, and you can check that. And then an LCA form, I think it's an LCA. There's going to be another form that will populate, and I'll pull that up for you. Okay. So here, right here, you see other terms and conditions. These, the rent cap auto populates. So I put these in 2 stacks with the auto population documents and then the disclosures that you need to pull separately. So now we're going to move along. Here is the signature page. Okay, for the housing provider and the tenant. Make sure all of this is filled out. Okay. So if the tenant did not pay coming in, which I don't think we'll be in that situation, but I just want to show you there is a form to handle that. So if they have not paid, this is the notice that would be provided, and the tenant has 2 days, 2 calendar days after delivery, or the housing provider may cancel the agreement. That's if you didn't collect ahead. This form is called Housing Provider Pre-Possession Notice to Tenant to Pay, for use when a tenant does not pay the amount due prior to taking possession, and it is called a PPN. Okay, so that's just a quick form if you ever needed it. I hope we don't, but so a lease rental commission agreement. This is another form. You don't have to use it, but you can. Now you have if you're the listing agent, you already have your commission in the listing agreement. If you're the tenant's agent, you should have the tenant representation. This is just an additional form.
It's the same one, the same form?
Yeah,
Oh,
we,
no, different.
yeah, you can either use it or not. It does reference in the agreement, but I just recommend we use the, the two agreements that you already have, okay?
We don't have it. on this one.
Yeah, I didn't put it in because I don't really, I didn't put this notice of sale of entry in either, but just bear in mind, if that property goes up for sale, and you're the lucky listing agent on it, make sure that the housing provider knows that they need to the notice of sale and entry form, okay? And it notifies them. Okay, so that would need to be delivered this way. It tells you even how to deliver it, how the housing provider will deliver this form, okay?
To the tenant.
To the tenant.
How long does the tenant or have? What's the period of time that the landlord has to let them know that the property is gonna be for sale?
Well, the reason this form is here is because presumably, people are gonna be wanting to see it. Now, you notice on some commercial properties, larger apartments, it's drive-by, submit offer, and then once the offer is accepted, then they'll let them look at the units. So this is strictly for residential. So some commercial units, they don't tell them, and then they get an offer, and then they have the prospective buyer come in. But this one, if it's residential and you're gonna need to be showing it while there is a tenant in place, you need to notify them. Okay,
But
the housing provider, I should say, not you.
the housing provider, but what's the time that the housing provider has to send and let you know, okay, we're gonna sell it in 1 month or 2 months or 3 months?
So they want to know how far in advance did you do this? I don't think that you need to do it 1 month, 2 month, 3 month in advance, but you do need to do it in advance of showing appointments. You need to let them know. Because anyway, they're probably going to see it on the internet or their neighbors are going to tell them, right? Okay. So that's just a pro tip, I guess you could say. If bed bug disclosure will populate with the lease agreement. Tenant flood hazard disclosure will populate with the lease agreement. These are all required. Rent cap and just clause addendum does populate. And I checked the box here just for fun, notice of exemption. I clicked it here. Even if that property is exempt from rent cap laws, please make sure that you still get the form signed, okay? Fair housing will populate with the lease that is required. And this information on dampness and mold for renters in California auto-populates with the lease agreement. Okay, so you don't have to worry about digging around for these. So now I'm going to go quickly into the agreement, the other disclosures. So these these don't auto-populate that I'm pulling up now, but they will be required, okay? So this is the RPOD. When you take a listing, you should have an RPOQ. That is a bigger version of this form, but that RPOQ is what the listing agent gets from the property owner and just keeps in the file for additional information they may need. The RPOD is intended to be provided with a lease listing or property. Okay, so this is filled out not by us, but by the property owner. It's simple questions, whether the premise was constructed prior to 1978, yes or no. So they're going to go down and answer all of these questions, okay? And it's pretty simple. Death on the premises, if it's in the last 3 years, we do need to notify them. So this is covering those kind of notifications anyway that we need to provide the tenant. So make sure you have this. Water conserving and plumbing fixtures. This is required. And it's on all single-family residence, multifamily, and commercial properties built on or before January 1, 1994. So if it falls within that range, make sure you have this form, okay? Lead-based paint disclosure, these are pre-1978 housing. So if your property is pre-78 built, make sure that you have your lead-based paint disclosure, okay? Lease and mold ventilation, this is required on all the lease agreements. This is the water submeter addendum. I just pulled it up just to show you. So if it's on a submeter, you're gonna need the client to help you fill this out because they can provide who's reading the submeter, things of that nature. So if a property is submetered and they're gonna be billed based on that submeter reading, make sure that you're providing the water submeter form addendum, okay? Water heater and smoke alarm statement of compliance, this is required. And they sign in 2 places. And this is our disclosure. This is a property management advisory. This is telling them that we leased, we're the leasing agent, but we're not the property management company. We don't collect rent. We don't get calls that the toilet's clogged, things like that. That's for the property owner. So this disclosure is required. And it's just an advisory that Coldwell Banker George Realty is not your property manager, okay? So we do require that. Here's your move-in inspection. So you fill this out. I would do it prior to them taking possession, of course, because, you want to get it in the condition it's being turned over to them. If you need pictures to document, make sure you're documenting that, but make sure this is done prior to them moving in. You want it in the current condition, okay? So this is required. We require it on all files for leasing. So that pretty much goes through the lease in detail and the disclosures that are required. So I will open it up to any questions.
The one that I would like you to go on is not here in this listing.
I already did that last week, but I can do it with you. Yeah. Emilio,
That section, right?
yes.
Yeah.
I have keys for you, so don't leave before I see you.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
Does anybody have any questions?
Good practice. Do you normally accept Zelle payments?
Okay, an agent is asking if we normally accept Zelle payment. I won't. No way. I have, no, I'm not the owner. I'm not gonna assume the risk. I don't want them zelling into my bank account.
No, Zelle directly.
That's up to the owner. For me, if I'm the owner, I'm gonna say, nah.
That's under the whole wire fraud.
Yeah.
Wire thing, right?
Yeah,
It is
it's
on the
up to
form.
the owner,
I
but
mean,
it's up to the owner. But for me, if you ask me personally, if it were me, I wouldn't, but I'm really, those kind of things make me nervous.
It is.
But it's up to the owner. They can accept it, but that is entirely up to them.
PayPal too.
And I get questions, representing, property owners. They'll say, oh yeah, I see you want, $35, $40. Can I just, send that directly to you? And I'm like, no, please don't, I don't even want to accept $35 or $40. I don't think it looks right, as an agent. But the property owner, sure, they can do whatever they want. If they're comfortable with it, they can rock on with that. Yeah. Any other questions or comments?
Yes, what if they pay, should, the owner charge, additional?
So she's asking, what if they have pets? Should the owner charge additional? You should just be prepared and have it built into the rent. The security deposit, I was looking at a training since I had a snafu last week. You can't charge additional security deposit. The security deposit is equal to 1 month in a combination of all items. So be aware of that. you know, so, but I'll address that. Let me look that up and address it more succinctly. And like we did last week, I will email it out so that it goes brokerage wide.
Places, they do charge.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But you can't put additional deposit because I was watching a training and the security deposit is set to the 1 month unless there's an exception. There are exceptions, as I said, for the small landlords, or excuse me, property owners.
One thing that I was looking at at other agents is that since the security is the same as the first month rent, they say transfer fee $200 in the listing and MLS listing. Keys $100.
Okay, so she's saying that she has seen in the MLS where they have listed like key deposit $100,
Transfer fee $200.
transfer fee $200, fine, as long as, like in our example, then your security deposit would be under 3,500 because now you're putting the 100 against the key. And
But
yeah, I just went to
They
training on
don't
this.
do it like that.
Yeah,
Security
that's
deposit-
okay. You can mention it to them to check with CAR, or you can check with CAR. Because the security deposit, no matter how you want to split it or break it up for a remote, $50 or whatever, it still only totals the 3,500 in our example.
But that's what I was looking. for.
Yeah.
This is more.
Yes,
And one of them I called because I was looking for somebody else and she said, what is the $200? What is the transfer fee, $200? Oh, the papers.
yeah.
So,
So maybe transfer fee is not a deposit and that falls under something else. Like I said, I'll have to check. But I know if you put deposits on keys, remotes, that thing, it all has to total the 3,500 as in our example. I don't know about a transfer fee, but I will find out and I will email everybody regarding that.
yeah, do, because the transfer, it was and the keys $100 and the security deposit was exactly the same amount as the first month.
Oh, well, if it's not exceeding the first month, then you're fine.
No, it was.
Oh, it
Because was
exceeded.
different. It was the security, it says there, security deposit, let's say 3,500, I don't remember the amount. Transfer fee 200, keys 100, so it was different.
Okay, I'll check into the admin fee of 200 or whatever their transfer fee. Any other questions?
Can we go over, the rent cap and just cause addendum?
Yes, so,
And specifically, I was wondering about, paragraph 2, the no fault reasons when you give somebody. I mean, that's not necessarily related to how to fill out the lease, but I just did have kind of a sidebar on that.
okay,
If you don't mind. We
so,
have time for that.
yes, okay, so I'm gonna go back into share. Somebody's asking about the rent cap.
And actually the no fault evictions in particularly, because it does say that you can ask a tenant, if you need to live there on like, or one of your family members, right?
Okay,
I believe they have to live there for like 3 years.
Yes.
right?
okay, so Coldwell Banker, George Realty, thank you for joining us. I will be stopping the recording. I will leave the camera and mic on. We're gonna look at some other things. So on rent cap, so I do appreciate you being here for the training. Thank you so much. And we'll see you on the next training next week. Everybody have a gorgeous weekend. Thank you for your time.
Michelle. Thank you, Michelle.
Thank